And now to another major political story playing out tonight, this one in Quebec City, where we find Ian.
Andrew, the G7 summit begins tomorrow, about 2 hours outside of Quebec City, but it is here that the protesters are hoping to make their voices heard. And those protests have already begun with a march tonight through the downtown as the G7 leaders began arriving. The summit has 5 themes: investing in growth, preparing for jobs of the future, gender equality, climate change, and building a more peaceful and secure world. But the actions of one G7 leader already overshadowing those intentions. New tweets tonight from Donald Trump taking direct aim at his Canadian host. We have extensive coverage on the tensions inside the summit and out on the streets. Plus, the Foreign Affairs Minister on what Canada hopes to accomplish. First, though, a look at the key locations. The action's expected in 2 places. At the summit itself in Lamal Bay, a resort town that almost seems built for security. One road in, thick woods all around. There's a secure green zone and an even more secure red zone. Nearly 4 kilometers of fencing around the leaders at the Fairmont Le Manoir Richelieu. Protesters are allowed, but restricted to a small parking lot just outside the green zone. But the major protests are set for Quebec City, not nearly as easy to secure given its size and complexity. Marches are expected to wind up and down the streets, ending at political venues like the U.S. Consulate and the National Assembly. And tonight's protest march, which went right by this building, has been peaceful. But as Jayla Bernstein reports, there were some clear signs of trouble ahead.
On the eve of the G7 summit, this message on Quebec City streets was clear as hundreds of people marched to the downtown core. This was the first of many expected protests, and tension is high. But those who came out to protest peacefully called out police for their confrontational tactics.
I was just walking down up to here, and there's much more policemen than people that are here in the streets to protest.
At least 2 people were detained and some pushed back against media. While some mass protesters added tension to a potentially volatile situation. But for most, it was maybe even a festive evening. More than 50 different interest groups were represented on the ground. What they all have in common, they're against the G7.
It's a joke.
Some are against capitalism or worried about gender equality and racism. Others blame G7 leaders for favoring oil and industry over the environment.
We need to start getting serious about cleaning the ocean.
This meeting is really a meeting organized by the 1%, only to serve the interests of the 1%.
Today was a test for what's to come. We have more days of protests. Tomorrow we're supposed to have protests like this, but all day long it's actually being called the Day of Disruption. Jayla Bernstein, CBC News, Quebec City.
While police prepare for mass protests outside the summit tomorrow, inside a face-off of another kind is expected. 6 of the leaders against Donald Trump. The CBC's David Cochrane has been looking into this, and you know, really, although there's a long agenda here, there's one issue.
Yeah, when Canada became the chair of the G7 for this year, it said it wanted to focus on 5 broad themes. It's now about one broad theme, and that's how do you deal with the United States in the age of U.S. President Donald Trump. So we're going to hear a very familiar message when the leaders start meeting tomorrow, and that's the trade war that Trump has started with the steel and aluminum tariffs is an unacceptable trade war that's only going to hurt everybody, that the tariffs are insulting and unacceptable. So we got a taste of that today when Prime Minister Justin Trudeau met with French President Emmanuel Macron. And in the news conference, Trudeau made it clear that he's not backing down in his positions. There's no attempt to escalate. He's not going to threaten to burn down the White House a second time. They're going to continue with what Canada is calling a polite but firm response to Trump. And here's what Trudeau said today.
I can certainly speak personally to say that I have consistently stood up for Canadian interests, consistently demonstrated where we disagree, but done so in a polite and cordial context. I think that's what Canadians have always expected of me, and that's exactly what we're going to do.
So President Donald Trump responded, and this being Donald Trump, the response came on Twitter. We've got a couple of tweets we want to show you. The first, please tell Prime Minister Trudeau and President Macron that they are charging the U.S. massive tariffs and create non-monetary barriers. The EU trade surplus with the U.S. is $151 billion, and Canada keeps our farmers and others out. Look forward to seeing them tomorrow, he said unironically. And then another tweet aimed specifically at Prime Minister Trudeau, saying Prime Minister Trudeau is being so indignant, bringing up the relationship that the U.S. and Canada had over the many years and all sorts of other things. But he doesn't bring up the fact that they charge 300% on dairy, hurting our families, killing our agriculture. So Trump, a couple of things there, confirming he is coming. There was some doubt of that, but he's coming in hot. He's coming in with his America First agenda. The G6, the other members are going to tell him America First often means America alone.
We have just about 30 seconds here, but what does all of this mean for the G7?
It's going to be a real challenge. The short-term future of the G7 to be effective is at risk this weekend. Normally, you see a communique where they all sign off, a unanimous statement of goals and principles. There's a lot of talk that that's not going to happen at this, that it will be a chair summary from Justin Trudeau. We saw this in Whistler with the finance ministers, and they rebuked the U.S. So there is a splintering and a factioning of the G7. And, you know, tomorrow night, Ian, when the leaders sit down for supper, they're going to be entertained by the Cirque du Soleil. If there was ever an event that needed acrobats and contortionists to make it work, it's this one.
Always so nice to talk to you. Thanks, David.
Thanks, man.
The Prime Minister has always said that Canada is ready for an escalating trade battle with its southern neighbor. Justin Trudeau's point person on the Canada-U.S. file is the Foreign Affairs Minister, Chrystia Freeland, and I sat down with her earlier today. What is going on now behind the scenes, particularly with your European allies, to try to figure out how to deal with President Trump?
Well, you are right, Ian. A lot is going on, and a lot has been going on. And I guess maybe that's the important place to start, is I think Canadians are very aware of how hard we have been working with the U.S. and with a broad range of American counterparties, not just the administration, but also legislators, governors, business, union, mayors. You know, the whole country has been blanketed by Team Canada.
And do you have further tariffs that might be imposed, you know, that are prepared if the United States decides to kind of raise the ante here as well?
So let me start by saying the happy ending to this story is these illegal tariffs are removed by the United States. That's the outcome that we want to get to. That is the good outcome for the United States, for the world, including for Canada.
So that would be the outcome you would hope for?
The outcome we want is they take away the illegal tariffs on Canadian steel and aluminum.
And
so that's what we are driving towards.
And so as we sit here right now, how likely is that to happen, and when?
You know, Ian, one of the things I said right at the beginning of the NAFTA negotiation was there would be a lot of drama and we should expect a lot of ups and downs. And that is as far as I go in making predictions.
Is there any specific strategy you have to deal with the president?
Yes, we have a lot of strategies to deal with the president. And I think, you know, one thing that I think Canadians have actually been able to see is how able the Prime Minister is to find a connection, I think, with everyone. I mean, I think it's a very powerful talent he has. We experience it as Canadians. It's one of his great skills as a politician. And I see it on the international stage. He's very good at talking to anyone and at forming that connection. And he does have a really good relationship with the president. I've seen it face to face in the bilateral meetings that I've attended. And a lot of senior figures in the administration have said to me, you know what, the president, he really likes the prime minister. Now, that relationship, that's not everything, right? And we've seen that you can have that good relationship and still have sharp disagreements about policy. But it's certainly helpful for us as Canadians that our prime minister is able to talk to the president of the United States.
What do you think the chances are of meaningful success here at the G7, given what's happened in the last few days with the president, particularly on tariffs?
Oh, I mean, for me, the way I define success at the G7 is that we have the important conversations I think it is important, you know, as Canadians, we are very focused on the economic relationship with the United States, and this illegal imposition of tariffs by the U.S. last Thursday is naturally a core concern, and it ought to be, and that will be an issue here. It's important to remember there are many, many other issues in the world, and there will be a lot of other issues discussed.
Thank you very much.
My pleasure, Ian. Great to talk to you.
We have more special coverage ahead from Quebec City. It is clear tonight the dynamics of this summit are unlike any other in recent memory.
This is going to be the most dysfunctional G7 summit since it was founded in 1975. This is going to be a profound, can I say shit show, of an international meeting.
So with that in mind, we'll get a Canadian perspective from two people who have been inside G7 and G8 meetings, former Prime Minister Paul Martin and former Foreign Affairs Minister John Baird. Our conversations are still to come on The National. Oh, how the mighty are mocked when 7 of the world's most powerful leaders gather in one place. All sorts of groups try to get some of that global attention. This puppet show by Oxfam is meant to draw attention to women's issues. As the G7 leaders get settled in at a resort in La Malbaie, Quebec, let's take a quick look at how membership to this elite club has changed over the years. The first meeting of big players was in 1975, created to deal with an oil crisis and turmoil in the world economy. Only 6 members then: the US, UK, France, Italy, Germany, and Japan. A year later, the US President Gerald Ford invited Canada to join. It became the G7. In 1998, it became the G8 when Russia joined, but Russia was suspended in 2014 after it annexed Crimea. So this year, as we've been saying, some are wondering if this really is the G6+1. The shadow looming over the summit is that the most powerful leader is also the most unpredictable. They are referred to as the family photos, a symbol of the close relationship among the leaders and their countries. But many are wondering what this year's portrait will look like when old friends are nursing new grievances, like Trump's tariffs on steel and aluminum. Susan Lejeune Dalgierzak is the UK's top diplomat to Canada.
The United States and the United Kingdom, like Canada and the United States, are really close partners. And you don't expect your close partners to do something as unacceptable as this. And free trade is very, very important to us and will become more important to us as we leave the European Union.
So where does that leave this year's G7? Ian Bremmer is an author, foreign policy analyst, and professor at New York University.
This is going to be the most dysfunctional G7 summit since it was founded in 1975, and it's not even close. I mean, this is going to be a profound, can I say shit show, of an international meeting.
They're our allies, but they take advantage of us.
Trump's disruption of the traditional world order goes beyond tariffs. The U.S. has pulled out of the Trans-Pacific Trade Partnership, the Iran deal, as well as ditching the Paris Climate Accord, leaving behind their G7 peers.
We have lived for decades now in a Pax Americana. Not everyone loves it, but nonetheless, it has been a U.S.-led Western architecture. The Bretton Woods institutions, the World Bank, the IMF, the WTO, the G7, the G20, the United Nations, that's the way the world order has run. And that order is in enormous threat right now. There is a level of creative destruction of our geopolitical order that no one is filling. The Chinese are building some alternative architecture, but America First is running away from it. And that is going to be in very clear evidence in Canada this week.
To get a Canadian view, we turn to some people who have been inside those G7 meeting rooms. First, John Baird, who was Stephen Harper's Foreign Affairs Minister.
There's some suggestion that
achieving any kind of meaningful consensus out of this meeting is very unlikely, and primarily because of Trump. What's your view on that?
Well, I think if all 7 or 8 countries that got together agreed on everything, you wouldn't need to have a meeting. Whenever the United States is around the table, obviously everyone's a second-tier player. Just the size of their economy, the size of their population, the fact that they're the only global superpower, that's a huge dynamic. But Canada plays a big role. You know, we are in the G7. We certainly are number 7. Mm-hmm. We have the 12th largest global economy. But you know, the United Kingdom just fell to number 6 in terms of the global economy. India's economy passed it. And now with the rise of China, I mean, Canada's economy was bigger than China 25 years ago. Mm-hmm. So the world is becoming demonstrably more complex and more difficult to steer in the right way. I think
still, drawing on his personal experience, Baird says don't underestimate the value of one-on-one meetings.
Well, it is probably the world's most exclusive mini convention. There's a lot of opportunities for networking and meetings on the side that perhaps don't get much attention, but are perhaps as important to the formal agenda.
I think that we're going into this G7 meeting in a very different set of parameters than what has happened historically since the end of the Second World War.
Former Prime Minister Paul Martin was in British Columbia last week speaking to G7 finance ministers.
We are going to have to basically reassert the optimism that globalization is a good thing and globalization can be made to work.
Like Baird, Martin is optimistic there will be some meaningful agreement at the G7 reached behind closed doors.
The most important part of any G7 meeting is the dinner. And I have found that those dinners are where more is accomplished and effectively you're able to talk to the other person, look him or her in the eye, and say, look, you know, you're not where we are and you're not going to succeed. And basically the answers come back and forth. And I have great hopes fundamentally for that private dinner.
But for all of their experience at these summits, keep in mind neither Martin nor Baird have ever dealt with a U.S. president like Donald Trump, a president who has turned unpredictability into a political doctrine. Justin Trudeau's green credentials may be on the line at this summit, especially after his government bought the Kinder Morgan pipeline. His goals here include leading the G7 to improve the health of the oceans by reducing plastic pollution. The movement against disposable plastic gained momentum last month in Vancouver. The city will ban plastic straws starting next year. So will Scotland. The rest of the UK may follow suit as it studies a ban on straws, cotton swabs, and stir sticks. But one California city saw no need to wait. Malibu, the home of movie stars and that gorgeous beach, has taken a hard stand against disposable plastic. Kim Brunhuber shows us why.
On a beach in Malibu, a group of young tourists from Argentina have no idea. Starting this month, what's in their drinks is illegal. Not the soda, the straws.
Did you know that here in Malibu, plastic straws are banned?
No, I mean, it's so common to use them.
They are as ubiquitous as seaweed. Almost anywhere you look along the California coast, bobbing in the surf like the masts of toy sailboats, are thousands and thousands of plastic straws. One study estimated that the world's oceans are polluted with 270,000 metric tons of plastic. 7% of that plastic, according to another study, is made up by straws and stir sticks.
Every time I'd go to the beach, I'd notice tons of plastic, and among that plastic, there was almost always 50% straws.
Moravati is a frustrated Malibu resident, fed up with all the straws washing up on the beach.
They end up in our waterways, they end up in sea life, and they end up back in us.
So last year, she started lobbying lawmakers to ban them, and it worked.
Right now, all of these are banned in the city of Malibu?
This whole bottom area is banned in our city to be replaced with all the stuff that you see at the top of this.
Malibu's ban, among the first and most stringent so far, covers not just straws, but other disposable plastics like cutlery. It's similar to a recent proposal by the European Union Commission that would limit single-use plastics, which the Commission claims makes up 70% of European beach litter. But in Malibu, some business owners balk at the cost of replacing all that plastic.
It's going to be expensive. We have to raise the prices down. We don't want to do that, but we have to.
All this is sustainable. It's grown.
Wagner insists the price of eco-friendly alternatives like these will come down. And Malibu's trendy status, he says, makes the city an environmental influencer.
With 13,000 residents, we're not polluting that much. But with 15 million visitors to our city every year, we can educate the visitors, and hopefully they take that information and disseminate it in their neighborhood.
Most of us suck.
Hollywood has embraced the cause.
Suck, suck, suck.
With efforts like this online campaign.
By 2050, there will be more plastic in the ocean than fish.
And in recent months, several big cities like New York and major national chains have proposed or adopted their own bans. The associations that represent Californian and Canadian plastic manufacturers told the CBC they oppose these bans, but declined an interview.
Oh!
As for those young lawbreakers,
if we can avoid using a little more plastic, so why not?
Something he'd never even thought about before, he says, is now hard to unthink. Kim Brunhuber, CBC News, Malibu, California.
And today, IKEA joined the crusade to cut back on plastic waste. The Swedish retail giant committing to stop selling single-use plasticware like cutlery and straws by 2020. It says its global reach could help inspire more than 1 billion customers, but sheer size can also limit a corporation. Just days ago, McDonald's CEO said there's no replacement for plastic straws on the vast scale required. With 60 million customers a day, the demand is simply too great. That's it for us tonight from Quebec City. We'll be back here tomorrow night as the summit officially begins. Until then, let's go back to Andrew in Vancouver.